You are stepping into the early dawn of Istanbul in a century when the Ottoman Empire is so sprawling and confident it seems the sun itself might pause to sip a little coffee here before moving on. The air tastes of roasted beans and damp limestone walls. You walk slowly because there's no reason to hurry when everyone agrees that life is a long conversation anyway. Your shoes scuff over uneven cobblestones. You pass rows of latticed windows where sleepy cats are already blinking at the world, considering whether they feel like acknowledging you. A thin blue haze curls out from the eaves, with smoke mingled with the first aromatic signals of the day's brewing. Somewhere behind you, a coppersmith begins hammering a shape you can't see, the soft clang echoing off walls the way thoughts echo in your own sleepy mind. In this era, coffeehouses are more than places to drink, though you're here for that too, obviously. They are the living rooms of a city that never stops telling stories. And whether you came to gossip, read aloud, or just disappear behind your cup, you will find your place among the cushions. You probably won't make it through this day. It's all right, nobody expects you to. Before you slip further into this drowsy past, consider tapping the little button to like and subscribe. That way, next time you need a place to rest your head, you'll find your way back. And if you feel inclined, leave a comment with your location and the time you pressed play. Somewhere in the world, it's always the hour for an Ottoman coffee. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You enter the coffee house through a low archway. The wooden lintel is smoothed by 1,000 hands, including yours now as you brush the frame without thinking. Inside, the air is warmer than you expect, scented with cardamom and something faintly sweet, perhaps the residue of rosewater pastries. In the corner, a man with an ink-stained sleeve gestures expansively with a scroll, convinced that everyone should hear his poem about the virtues of quiet living. It's still early, and the proprietor, a patient fellow in a blue vest, nods to you without rising from his low stool. He is busy arranging tiny porcelain cups on a brass tray as though each cup has a particular destiny. A major fact to tuck into your mind: the Ottomans were the first to establish coffeehouses as official institutions, sanctioned and taxed, yet periodically banned because authorities worried too much caffeine might lead to revolutionary thoughts. And perhaps it did, though mostly it led to long, meandering debates about whether a particular poet was overrated. You hear the scrape of a chair leg on the tiles. Someone you can't quite see is lighting a little brazier, coaxing a flame to life with practiced indifference. The flame catches, and a brief gold glow flickers over the copper kettles lined up like loyal sentries. In the far corner, a painted niche holds a collection of small, mysterious objects: an old astrolabe, a string of beads, a tiny ceramic camel. Historians still debate whether these displays were meant as mere decoration or as secret symbols for the initiated. You choose a low cushion near the window. As you settle in, a tabby cat pads over, gives you a look of profound disappointment, then curls up anyway as if deciding you'll do. Outside, the street you walk down seems already softer, blurred around the edges by the comforting hum of people who came here to escape the relentless importance of their own lives. Your first cup arrives in a porcelain vessel so small you wonder if it's only meant for tasting. The man in the blue vest sets it down without ceremony, but you feel a faint sense of ceremony anyway. You take a sip and the coffee is dark as midnight and almost too hot. Almost. The liquid seems to wake up every part of you at once, which feels mildly ironic given you're here to fall asleep. But in this place, even wakefulness is a kind of gentle dreaming. Across from you, two elderly men are locked in a polite but unending argument about the merits of Persian versus Arabic calligraphy. Their voices never rise above a mutter, as though they fear disturbing the dust motes drifting in the sunbeam between them. A young scribe arrives with a basket of folded pamphlets, news of the empire, tidbits about trade routes, poems of questionable quality. You notice he charges a modest fee for reading them aloud to those whose eyes are too tired or who simply enjoy the indulgence of being read to. You hear the scribe's voice weaving through the air, a smooth, practiced cadence that makes even the most mundane dispatch sound profound. Ship arrivals in Alexandria, grain shortages in Konya, a new pastry technique imported from Venice. You imagine some future historian squinting at these same pamphlets, trying to guess which bits were important and which were filler. A major historical fact slides into your thoughts with the ease of a cat onto a warm cushion. In the 16th century, Ottoman coffeehouses doubled as unofficial libraries and message hubs. For many people, this was their primary source of news, assuming you trusted the scribe's pronunciation. One of the men debating calligraphy sighs so deeply you wonder if he's finally given up. But no, he merely leans back, surveys the ceiling beams, and begins describing an obscure manuscript he claims to have seen in Cairo, a collection of proverbs so peculiar it was said to make even the Sultan chuckle. Outside, you catch a glimpse of the same tabby cat slipping between the legs of new arrivals. Remember the street you walked past earlier? It's back, this time trailing in fresh gossip and the clinking of more cups being set onto trays. A sweet pastry arrives on a small plate, the edges sticky with syrup. You take a careful bite, and the flavor is so rich it makes you want to close your eyes for a moment. The scribe notices your expression and gives you the faintest nod, as if to say, yes, this is how it's meant to be. In the corner, a pair of students attempt to rehearse a play, though they can't seem to remember more than a few lines at a time. Their laughter drifts over to you, and you find it oddly comforting to know that even centuries ago, nobody could keep their act together for long. Historians still debate whether such performances were tolerated or secretly discouraged, but here, in this slow morning light, it feels as though anything harmless was permitted. You lean back on the cushion, the taste of cardamom lingering on your tongue, and listen to the endless, soft shuffle of cups and voices. And though you could get up and leave at any time, it occurs to you that staying right here might be the most reasonable decision you've made in a long while. You rest your elbow on the windowsill, feeling the polished wood still warm from yesterday's sun. Outside, the morning has gathered itself into a soft bustle. Sandaled feet pass by, trailing conversations about price and poetry, about why the fishmongers seem especially cheerful today. Inside, the coffee house feels like a slow-moving theater, and you've bought a ticket you can never quite finish. You sip again, noticing the subtle grit at the bottom of the cup. A sign, the proprietor once told you, that the grounds were fresh and unfiltered, as tradition demanded. A small boy wanders through the tables with a basket of figs for sale, humming a tune so familiar you suspect it's been passed down since the first traders docked in Istanbul's harbor. He pauses beside you, solemnly offers a fig, and then wanders away when you nod your thanks. A major fact curls around your thoughts like steam. In Ottoman times, figs were considered a respectable breakfast, a polite dessert, and, in certain cases, a gift to curry favor with important neighbors. The little boy probably doesn't know he's continuing a centuries-old ritual, but then again, maybe he does. Near the door, a trio of merchants compares notes on caravan routes. They speak in such a low register you can barely make out the words, except when one of them snorts softly at a claim about an overland shortcut that would shave a week off the trip. You can almost hear the sarcasm stretching between their smiles. The young scribe reappears, sorting through a fresh sheaf of announcements. He clears his throat to read aloud a proclamation about new taxes on imported dyes. A detail so thrilling you can feel your eyelids growing heavier just imagining it. Historians still debate whether these public readings were always accurate, or whether scribes occasionally improved the narrative to keep listeners awake or amused. A thin, whiskery man in a green robe sets down a tiny painted box in front of the proprietor. Inside, you glimpse what looks like a collection of miniature brass spoons. The proprietor leans in, studying each spoon with the seriousness usually reserved for legal contracts. Without a word, he selects one, weighs it in his hand, and nods. Transaction complete. You watch the exchange, struck by the notion that in this place, every object carries a secret history, every spoon a story, every cup a memory. The cat returns, hopping onto the windowsill beside you. She leans against your shoulder with the air of a creature claiming a shared inheritance. You suppose you've earned the right to be included in her territory now. Outside, the sunlight shifts. A breeze stirs the hanging carpets strung along the walls. You feel the hush in the room deepen, as if everyone is waiting for something, though no one seems sure exactly what. And so you sit halfway between past and present, with your fig in one hand and your cooling coffee in the other, aware that in the city, being unhurried is the closest thing to a virtue. A gentle commotion rises near the entrance. A man wearing a crimson sash gestures broadly to a group of newcomers, explaining that the coffee house is, in fact, the oldest in this neighborhood. Though you suspect he has no idea if that's true. The newcomers nod solemnly, as if they're being inducted into a secret society of caffeinated philosophers. You take another sip and notice the grounds have settled into a constellation pattern, a little galaxy at the bottom of your cup. If you were an Ottoman fortune teller, and who's to say you're not just for tonight, you might read in those shapes a promise of pleasant dreams. The scribe perches on a low stool and begins reciting a tale about a merchant whose entire fortune was stolen by a parrot. This unlikely theft elicits a polite ripple of amusement. You find yourself smiling, though you're also trying to picture how a parrot could manage such a feat. A major historical fact: in the 17th century, the popularity of storytelling in coffeehouses grew so much that professional narrators, known as metas, earned a living traveling from one venue to another. They memorized dozens of epics and improvised embellishments, though some audiences preferred the shorter tales about everyday absurdities. The proprietor passes your table with a fresh pot balanced on a tray. He tilts it slightly, offering a refill, and you nod. As the dark stream fills your cup again, you feel the warmth of it seep into your palms, a slow reassurance that you are precisely where you should be. Near the painted niche, a scholar in a dusty turban is meticulously transcribing an ancient text onto fresh parchment. Every few minutes, he sighs and scratches his cheek with the feathered end of his pen, leaving a faint smudge of ink. You watch him a while, admiring the patience required to copy words that have already outlived generations. Historians still debate whether these scholars were officially sanctioned by religious authorities or simply tolerated, as long as their work remained harmless. In either case, their devotion to preserving knowledge is obvious even in the way they straighten each sheet before continuing. Remember the fig seller? He returns now, trailing the same tune that you suspect he's added a few improvised notes to keep himself entertained. This time he carries a smaller basket of dates, which he presents with a solemn nod. You accept one and discover it's impossibly sweet, like a little morsel of sunset. The scribe's tale about the thieving parrot reaches its conclusion. The bird apparently retired to an undisclosed location with the stolen treasure, and the listeners murmur their appreciation. Someone begins to applaud, but stops halfway, perhaps realizing applause is too vigorous for this hour. The cat sprawls more decisively across your lap, her tail flicking once before settling. You feel her purring, a low, reassuring vibration that matches the slow rhythm of the morning. Beyond the doorway, the street has brightened fully. Merchants rearrange their wares, and a woman in a blue shawl sweeps her threshold with delicate care, as though she's brushing away not just dust but any lingering scraps of yesterday's worries. You exhale, feeling a contentment that is both yours and borrowed from centuries of others who sat here, in the same mellow hush, certain that nothing very urgent needed to happen. The air inside the coffee house has shifted slightly. It's warmer now, richer with the scent of roasted beans and the kind of faint perfume that lingers in fabric woven by patient hands. You stretch a little, not enough to disturb the cat on your lap, but enough to feel your spine remind you that Ottoman cushions, while elegant, weren't designed by orthopedic experts. Across the room, a new guest arrives wearing a coat with far too many buttons for the weather. He removes it slowly, revealing a set of scrolls tucked into his belt, each bound in red string. Without saying a word, he unrolls one onto the table in front of him and begins what appears to be an elaborate diagram of a celestial map or possibly a family tree of spices. Your attention wanders to the soft chime of a spoon being stirred against porcelain. The spoon is tiny and unnecessarily delicate. You wonder if anyone's ever managed to eat soup with it. Probably not. Still, it's a beautiful spoon. A major historical fact floats into the conversation your brain is having with itself. Ottoman coffee houses weren't just places of leisure, they were, at times, under careful surveillance by state authorities, who worried that too many ideas in one room might lead to unrest. This concern was only partly misplaced, though it's safe to say most of today's discussions revolve more around poetry than rebellion. Someone behind you is quoting Rumi, slowly, as though each word must pass through velvet before it lands. The line floats in the air, try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. You nod, and so does the cat, probably. Historians still debate whether such poetry readings were impromptu or planned. Either way, the line between literature and conversation in this place is as blurry as the bottom of your coffee cup. You look back at the celestial map. The button man is now arguing with himself about whether Venus or cinnamon has more influence over mood. He punctuates his reasoning by nibbling the edge of a honey cake. Outside, the light flickers through a gauze of laundry strung between buildings, colorful cloth flapping gently like half-hearted flags. Remember the woman sweeping her doorstep? She's now engaged in a quiet negotiation with a basket vendor. They seem to be discussing the moral strength of various weaves. The cat shifts, stretches her paws, and sighs the way only cats can, dramatically, yet somehow bored. Her tail flicks over your sleeve as if to say, "You're part of this now," and you are. Inside, a man at the next table begins telling a story about a goose that once refused to leave a sultan's court, eventually being awarded its own velvet cushion. The story is likely nonsense, and yet, you find yourself hoping it's true. The sun has fully claimed the morning now, sliding golden light across the mosaic-tiled floor. It plays against the legs of stools, the edges of robes, the rim of your second, possibly third cup. You've stopped counting. The proprietor moves among the tables with a practiced slowness, carrying a tall brass vessel that steams from the top like a sleepy volcano. He pours without asking, trusting that if you were done, you'd have said so. Or at least moved your cup somewhere out of arm's reach. You sip again. This one has a subtle clove flavor. Or maybe nutmeg. You're too relaxed to analyze it properly, which is probably the point. A major historical fact floats by. Coffee, first imported to the Ottoman Empire from Yemen in the 16th century, became so culturally embedded that the failure to provide it at home could be considered grounds for divorce. Yes, that's real. You suddenly feel a deep respect for whoever lobbied for that clause. Nearby, the scribe is now reading a different kind of document, a letter written by a merchant to his daughter. It's simple and sweet, full of reassurances and news about figs, horses, and the quality of river barges. You imagine the daughter listening somewhere far away, cup in hand, wrapped in a shawl the color of dusk. Historians still debate whether these personal letters were truly shared aloud or if this practice was invented later by nostalgic poets. Either way, the effect is calming, like listening to someone else's dream. The man with the celestial map has dozed off. His scroll lies open across his chest like a forgotten prophecy. You wonder if he dreamed himself into the stars or into the kitchen where someone is now peeling oranges, judging by the sharp citrus note that just joined the air. A trio of women enter, their conversation soft and animated. They carry baskets of embroidery, each design more intricate than the last. One of them pulls out a nearly finished panel featuring, yes, a cat in an Ottoman vest. The resemblance is uncanny. The real cat, still on your lap, seems unimpressed. In the background, a soft stringed instrument begins to play. Not live, just the echo of someone practicing in the building behind. The melody rises and falls like the heartbeat of the street. You glance back toward the street and notice something lovely. A man balancing 3 teacups on one hand while gesturing with the other mid-story. No one seems worried the cups will fall. This is a city built on faith, in stories, in balance, in the quiet confidence of tea not spilled. And so you sit, the day unfurling around you like silk from a loom, threads of conversation, fragrance, and heat weaving gently around your slowing breath. The melody from the unseen instrument drifts in and out, mingling with the soft percussion of cups meeting saucers and the occasional murmur of agreement. You feel as though the coffee house is gently humming around you, its own kind of lullaby disguised as conversation. The proprietor, who has refilled your cup at least twice without asking, pauses by the window. He watches the street with an expression you can't quite read, somewhere between wistful and amused. Maybe he's remembering when he first learned to balance the tall brass pot without scalding his wrists. A major historical fact: during the height of Ottoman coffee culture, some establishments were known for specific specialties. One might boast the smoothest Yemeni roast, another the fluffiest pastries. and yet another a resident storyteller who claimed to have memorized every love poem ever composed in Arabic. Whether or not this claim was true, nobody seemed inclined to challenge him. You shift on your cushion, feeling the fabric give a little under your weight. It smells faintly of lavender and old wood smoke, as if all the seasons of the past 100 years had decided to stay here rather than fade away. The cat, who has apparently concluded you are both a reliable cushion and a trustworthy audience, has stretched out her front paws until they nearly dangle off your knee. Her ears twitch every so often, registering each new voice that rises above the steady murmur. Near the door, a man in a pale turban is demonstrating a device shaped like a tiny mill. He insists it can grind coffee beans into powder so fine that it dissolves instantly. The handful of onlookers nod politely. You suspect they're just being gracious. Historians still debate whether such gadgets ever worked as advertised or were simply a clever way to part enthusiasts from their coins. A breeze moves through the open window, lifting the edge of a scroll resting near your elbow. You smooth it gently, noticing the delicate calligraphy tracing out some decree you can't quite translate. It doesn't matter. The script itself feels like part of the room's memory. Remember the trio of women with the embroidery? One of them has begun stitching the last few details on her cat in a vest. Every so often she pauses to squint at your real cat for reference, though the subject remains steadfastly uninterested in artistic likeness. A low chuckle drifts across the room as someone repeats the story of the goose who earned a velvet cushion. You realize the tale has already evolved. Now the goose has acquired a tiny ceremonial turban and an honorary title. You take another sip, letting the warmth fill you. The street beyond the window has brightened to the color of fresh parchment. Someone is selling dates from a cart, and you watch as the vendor gently rearranges them into a perfect pyramid, then immediately moves one date back to the top, perhaps just to feel that small satisfaction of getting it exactly right. And you find yourself thinking that maybe, here, perfection is less about arriving at the final form and more about savoring the attempt. The morning has settled into the kind of stillness that makes even the busiest corners feel like they're politely waiting for you to finish your thoughts. You notice the proprietor has begun humming to himself, a soft, tuneless melody that fits perfectly into the hush. At the table beside yours, the scribe has switched to a new stack of documents, each stamped with a wax seal. He peels them open with deliberate slowness, as if every letter might contain a treasure. Occasionally, he reads a line aloud in a voice so calm you suspect he could make tax records sound almost poetic. A major historical fact drifts by. In 17th century Istanbul, coffeehouses became so central to daily life that they were sometimes called schools of the wise. Whether you were actually wise or simply good at appearing thoughtful over a cup was, of course, another matter entirely. Across the room, a student in a green vest is sketching the pattern of the tiles underfoot. Every few minutes, he erases some detail and redraws it, muttering that he wants to capture the true geometry. His friend watches this process with the tolerant expression of someone who knows better than to interrupt an artistic crisis. Historians still debate whether coffeehouses encouraged more genuine scholarship or more gentle pretense. Probably both. You adjust your position on the cushion, careful not to disturb the cat, who has apparently decided she will remain here until you do. Her breathing has slowed, and you feel the faint weight of her trust in the quiet between your heartbeats. Outside the window, the woman in the blue shawl, remember her? Has finally concluded her negotiation with the basket seller. She carries her prize home balanced on her hip, walking past a group of boys playing a desultory game of knucklebones. Back inside, the proprietor brings you a small dish of candied apricots. He sets it down with a nod, as if to say that the time has come for something sweet. You pick one up and discover it's soft and floral, the kind of taste that can make you forget any notion of time passing. The student with the sketchbook sighs so dramatically you wonder if it might be his final breath, then immediately leans forward to start again. His friend bites back a smile and takes a sip of coffee so small it barely dampens his lip. Someone begins to recite a proverb about patience being sweeter than sugar. You decide you have no interest in testing this theory. Sugar tastes quite fine. The breeze returns, fluttering the edges of the proprietor's vest. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the layered sounds, a cup being set down, a spoon clinking against porcelain, the distant song of a peddler hawking dried herbs. When you open your eyes again, the cat is watching you with the faint curiosity of someone wondering whether you, too, will doze off. And maybe you will. After all, in this place, staying awake is optional. Of your coffee, and notice the flavor has deepened into something darker and smoother. Perhaps this is what happens when you surrender entirely to the slow unfolding of the morning. The tall man with prophetic dreams has moved on to explaining how the perfect coffee foam requires exactly 7 counterclockwise stirs. His audience nods solemnly, though one woman glances at her companion with an expression that clearly says, "We are definitely not trying this at home." Remember the embroidery trio? They've finished the cat in a vest masterpiece. One of them holds it up, and for the first time your Real cat opens one eye to survey her likeness. She blinks once, closes her eye again, and returns to sleep. Artistic approval, Ottoman style. And you find yourself marveling that in this little room the ordinary has become remarkable and the remarkable has become part of the furniture. The day has grown bright enough that the light pools across the floor like liquid gold, slipping over the edges of every table and softening the corners of the room. You lean back and feel your spine crack in 3 polite little pops, the sort that sound almost like an apology for existing too long in the same position. The proprietor moves slowly from one table to the next, checking cups, offering more candied apricots to anyone who so much as glances in his direction. He refills your cup with the quiet efficiency of a man who has measured out thousands of mornings and discovered that the ritual never loses its purpose. At the far end of the room, a tall man with eyebrows so impressive they deserve their own footnotes is describing a dream he had about a coffee pot the size of a minaret. He insists the dream was prophetic, though nobody seems entirely convinced. A major historical fact drifts into your drowsy mind. Ottoman coffeehouses were sometimes called kahvekhane, and they were among the first places where people of different classes might gather and speak as equals, or at least pretend to. For some, that was the true thrill, not the coffee, but the soft erasure of social boundaries. The cat stretches and shifts on your lap, giving a half-hearted yawn before resuming her important work of gently shedding fur onto your sleeve. You've accepted that she is the true proprietor here, and you are merely renting the cushion. Near the window, the scribe has paused to inspect a coin someone has pressed into his hand. He holds it up to the light as if to confirm it's real. Historians still debate whether scribes made their true living from copying texts or from the tips slipped to them by appreciative listeners. Outside, the street has acquired a steady rhythm, merchants calling out in voices already gone hoarse, children darting between baskets of dates and copper pots, a donkey ambling past with a resigned patience you can almost admire. You take another sip. You feel the moment when the morning turns decisively into afternoon. Not because of any grand proclamation, but because the light shifts a few degrees and someone decides to open a second window. A breeze drifts across your face, carrying the faintest trace of sea salt from the Bosphorus. The proprietor appears at your side with a small brass censer, wafting a lazy spiral of incense across the tables. It smells of sandalwood and something you can't quite place. Perhaps the ghost of 100 previous gatherings. A major historical fact. Certain coffee houses were famous not only for their brews, but for the incense rituals that accompanied them. The burning of scented wood was believed to heighten both memory and imagination, though whether that claim holds up to modern science is another question entirely. The scribe has moved on to a sheaf of poems. He reads them in the same unhurried tone he used for trade announcements, as though love and barley shipments were of precisely equal importance. You suspect he may be right. The tall man with the enormous eyebrows has drifted into a doze, his head tilted back so that he resembles a dignified heron napping in the reeds. No one seems inclined to wake him. Historians still debate whether naps in coffeehouses were officially condoned or simply tolerated as part of the natural rhythm of life. You are inclined to believe the latter. A new arrival appears in the doorway, a woman with a red shawl folded neatly over her arm. She glances around, finds an empty cushion, and sits with the graceful certainty of someone who has been here 100 times before. She unpacks a bundle of handwritten notes, smoothing each page with delicate fingertips. Remember the student with the sketchbook? He has resumed his determined efforts to capture the geometry of the tiles. Every time he sighs, his friend makes an encouraging noise that sounds increasingly rehearsed. The breeze from the window stirs the cat's fur. She shifts her position. On your lap, curls tighter and emits a sound that is almost a purr. You consider this progress. Outside, the donkey has vanished, replaced by a man selling bright green herbs from a pair of woven baskets. You watch as he weighs each bundle with a set of brass scales, his movements careful and precise. You take another sip of coffee, which has somehow become even richer in flavor, as though the afternoon itself has seeped into it. The woman in the red shawl clears her throat and begins to read aloud a story, an old tale about a shipwrecked sailor who survived by befriending a family of courteous turtles. The listeners lean in, the scribe stops mid-annotation, and even the cat flicks an ear in curiosity. You settle back against your cushion, letting the cadence of her voice carry you further into the afternoon, where nothing urgent waits and every hour unfolds as gently as the last. You barely notice when the story ends. The woman in the red shawl folds her papers with the grace of someone who has known silence and respects it. The coffee house does not erupt into applause. This is not a place of applause, but there's a shift in posture, a quiet sigh, a few subtle nods, and the unmistakable clink of a coin being dropped into a saucer in quiet appreciation. You sip the last of your coffee, which has gone slightly cool but still holds its flavor like a memory refusing to fade. The cat is now fully asleep, one paw draped dramatically over your wrist like she's trying to prevent you from writing an overly emotional poem. The afternoon has deepened into the sort of warmth that makes wood creak and dust sparkle. The sun slants across the tile floor, tracing the same lines the student has been trying to sketch all morning. He gives up briefly and flops backward with a groan that sounds like it was borrowed from an exhausted librarian. A major historical fact floats through the air like incense. Some Ottoman coffeehouses offered patrons reading spectacles as part of the service. Imagine that, ordering a cup and being handed a pair of lenses so you could better admire the footnotes of a 14th century treatise on garden planning. The proprietor vanishes briefly into a back room and returns carrying a tray of preserved lemons and something wrapped in fig leaves. He sets it on a central table, an unspoken invitation to anyone still alert enough to nibble. Historians still debate whether food offerings in coffeehouses were consistent or improvised, but in this room the answer is clear. Everything depends on who showed up that day and what they happened to carry in their satchel. Near the window, two men begin quietly playing backgammon. They hardly speak except for the occasional grunt or muttered compliment to the dice. One of them wears a vest so stiffly embroidered it could double as armor. Outside, the world has softened slightly. The vendors have moved into the shade, fanning themselves with old newspapers, and a pigeon is engaged in an unusually focused one-bird standoff with a piece of bread. The breeze picks up again, rustling the scrolls left behind by the man with the celestial map. He is still asleep, his hands tucked under his head, his face tilted toward the window as if waiting for a dream to finish whispering to him. You lean your head back, letting your eyes drift to the beams above. Each one bears the ghost of long-vanished smoke and the polish of countless glances. There's something comforting in knowing the ceiling has watched thousands of quiet afternoons just like this one. You close your eyes for a moment, and when you open them again, the only thing that's changed is that someone's lit a candle in the far corner. It flickers like it's been awake longer than any of you. The candle in the corner begins to throw long shadows across the floor, stretching under tables and reaching for slippers. It is the kind of late afternoon light that feels as though it's walking you gently toward the idea of evening, with no rush, no schedule, just the steady pressure of time wrapping a shawl over its shoulders. You shift your weight, careful not to disturb your feline tenant, and notice a tiny embroidered pillow tucked beneath the table, just the right size for a cat or a very refined pigeon. You suspect neither paid for it. The woman in the red shawl is now quietly exchanging recipe notes with the embroidery trio. There's some mild debate over how long to steep rose petals for syrup, and one of them swears by adding crushed coriander seeds for a surprising finish. Everyone nods in the way people do when they've no intention of trying that but admire the bravery. A major historical fact seeps into your thoughts like honey into tea. Many coffeehouses in the Ottoman Empire were unofficial recipe libraries where cooks, herbalists, and sweet sellers swapped techniques between sips. Some of the best-preserved culinary traditions survived not through books, but through whispered comparisons over warm cups. A small bell rings softly as someone leaves, and for a brief moment, the coffeehouse door opens wide enough for the breeze to carry in the scent of the sea, briny and sharp, like memory. The student who had given up sketching has resumed his project, but now he's drawing the cat. She does not object. You suspect this is more because she's too sleepy to flee than out of any modeling ambition. Historians still debate whether pets in coffeehouses were tolerated or quietly beloved. This one clearly owns the building and the surrounding block. Remember the backgammon players? One of them has just won the game and, in a gesture of victorious generosity, offers the other a fig leaf-wrapped sweet from the proprietor's tray. It is accepted, with a grunt that clearly translates to, "I'll beat you next round." Outside, someone begins playing a reed flute. The sound floats into the coffeehouse like a forgotten breeze, threading through the candlelight and brushing past your sleeve. It doesn't matter who's playing or why. The music belongs here. The proprietor walks by again and asks very softly if you'd like another cup. You hesitate for half a second, and he smiles as if to say yes, of course you would. The cup is filled again, and this time the flavor is mellow, as if the beans themselves have grown tired of performing and just want to rest. You cradle the cup, feel the warmth, and realize the shadows have made friends with the furniture. Even the light is slower now, as though the sun itself has taken a seat near the brazier and is sipping something sweet. And so you remain, one more figure in a room that doesn't change so much as it breathes. Deeply, slowly, and with the quiet certainty of a world content to let the day unfold one golden second at a time. The candle in the corner has burned down to a low amber stub, flickering with the determination of something that refuses to be snuffed out before its story is done. The proprietor seems content to let it finish in its own time. Your cat has curled into a tight ball, her tail wrapped over her nose. You suspect she would prefer you not move again until sunrise. The weight of her little body is somehow anchoring, as though she's pinned you here on purpose. A major historical fact, Ottoman coffeehouses were sometimes known as Mektepi Irfan, schools of knowledge. It's a fine name that you suspect if you asked the regulars here what they were learning, most would shrug and say nothing in particular, which, in its own way, is an education. Near the doorway, a man in a pale blue robe is reciting a string of proverbs so slowly they sound almost like a lullaby. The listeners nod along, their eyes half-lidded, their posture that of people hovering between wakefulness and dreams. Historians still debate whether such proverbs were collected into proper volumes or simply passed from mouth to mouth, gathering small embellishments along the way. You prefer to imagine the latter, a tapestry of borrowed wisdom draped over centuries. The student's sketch of the cat is finally complete. He shows it to his friend, who squints, tilts his head, and pronounces it sufficiently dignified. This, apparently, is the highest of compliments. The backgammon players are on their third round. They say little, but their gestures have developed a language all their own, a hand fluttering to indicate surprise, a raised eyebrow signaling triumph, a weary shrug conveying that a rematch is inevitable. Outside, the street has quieted. Vendors are packing away their wares under the indigo sky. A boy with a lantern passes by the window, his footsteps so soft they feel more imagined than real. You take another sip of coffee. By now, the flavor is like a memory of itself, faint, warm, a suggestion more than a taste. It doesn't matter. You're drinking the evening as much as the brew. The proprietor has settled on a stool near the brazier, polishing a brass pot with a scrap of linen. He does this with the unhurried focus of someone who has found the perfect way to fill the in-between hours. Remember the woman in the blue shawl? She's back, carrying a basket you recognize as the one she negotiated for earlier. She sets it carefully beside her seat, and you sense she feels this is precisely the right place to end the day. The candle finally gutters out, leaving behind a tiny curl of smoke. Nobody rushes to replace it. In this moment, the darkness is welcome, a gentle confirmation that the afternoon has surrendered to evening and there's nothing left to prove. The coffee house has become a softer place, lit by the glow of a few scattered lamps and the final embers in the brazier. Shadows have thickened along the corners, wrapping the tiled floor in a velvet hush. You stretch one leg carefully, earning a disapproving flick of the cat's tail. She opens one eye, assesses the threat level of your movement, and closes it again with a sigh that says you're forgiven, but only just. A major historical fact drifts through the quiet. In some Ottoman cities, evening was when the coffee houses grew busiest, as workers, students, and merchants all arrived to share stories, listen to readings, and sometimes simply sit together in companionable silence. You imagine the same gentle chaos unfolding hundreds of nights in a row. The student and his friend have packed away their sketchbook and dice. Now they sit shoulder to shoulder, sharing a plate of sugared almonds. They don't speak. They don't need to. Some friendships are measured in shared silences, not words. Near the back wall, the woman in the red shawl reopens her bundle of notes. But instead of reading aloud, she smooths each page and stacks them neatly as if closing a ledger for the day. When she finishes, she sets her hand on the pile and lets out a long, quiet breath. Historians still debate whether evenings in coffee houses were considered private or communal time. But you suspect they were always a little of both, a place where solitude and fellowship braided together in the lamplight. The proprietor lights a tiny clay lamp near your table. Its glow pulls across the rim of your cup, making the dark liquid look almost like polished lacquer. Outside, the night air is cool and smells faintly of salt and charcoal. A donkey, perhaps the same patient soul from earlier ambles past, indifferent to the hour. The embroidery trio has packed away their sewing. They lean back against the cushions with the posture of people who have no intention of leaving until the last lamp burns. A thin, sweet melody drifts in from a distant courtyard. A reed flute, slow and unhurried, notes spaced wide as footfalls in fresh snow. It feels like the perfect soundtrack for this final hour. You take what must be your last sip of coffee, savoring the delicate bitterness. There is no rush to finish. Here, everything has the dignity of its own time. And so you sit, one more soul among the many who have come to this place, seeking nothing in particular and finding, somehow, exactly what you needed. The lamplight has settled into a steady, honeyed glow. You feel as though you're seeing the room not with your eyes, but with something softer and more patient, some inner sense that finally understands how evenings here stretch beyond the ordinary clock. The cat, confident that you are going nowhere, has eased back into sleep so profound that even the faint clink of a spoon against porcelain doesn't stir her. You have become part of her furniture, a cushion with a heartbeat. The proprietor moves among the remaining guests, collecting empty cups, folding stray cloths. He does it gently, as though careful not to wake the stories still lingering in the air. A major historical fact floats in on the breeze. Some Ottoman coffee houses stayed open until dawn, a quiet refuge for night watchmen, poets, and anyone else who found the darkness more hospitable than daylight. No judgment was offered, only another cup and a place to sit. The woman in the blue shawl, remember her, pulls the basket closer to her side, resting her hand lightly on the woven lid. It feels like a gesture of closure, the final punctuation on a long, contented sentence. Historians still debate whether these nightly gatherings shaped culture or merely reflected it. You suspect the answer is yes to both. Every sip, every story, every nod of recognition layered another thin stratum onto the city's memory. Outside, the street has gone quiet. Even the vendors have drifted away, leaving only the occasional footstep to mark the passage of time. A lantern swings gently from a hook, casting shadows that dance along the cobblestones like the last embers of a dream. The proprietor pauses beside your table. He doesn't ask if you're ready to leave, he only inclines his head in the smallest of nods, a shared understanding that you've found something worth keeping here. Even if you can't name it, you take a slow, final look around. The brazier glows low, a quiet heart-beating warmth into the hush. The backgammon board lies closed, the embroidery tucked away. The cat curls tighter against you, certain that tomorrow will look much the same. And it will. Wind down. So now you let your shoulders sink just a little deeper into the cushion. You feel the last of the lamplight slide across your face like a tender hand smoothing away whatever cares you carried here. The air smells of sandalwood and faintly of cooling brass, like a memory still warm to the touch. Somewhere beyond the shuttered window, the Bosphorus breathes against the docks, the tide slipping in and out with the same quiet rhythm that has rocked the city to sleep for centuries. You imagine the lanterns bobbing in the darkness, each one cradling its small flame as carefully as you cradle your own tired thoughts. Your cup is empty now, but somehow you are more full of all these gentle hours, of soft conversations you were never quite part of but always welcome to hear, of the knowledge that life can be slow and tender and unremarkable in the best possible way. So you close your eyes, feeling the hush settle into your bones. You have been here long enough to understand that nothing truly ends, not even the longest day. It only folds itself gently into the next, like a story set aside for later, when you are rested, when you are ready to begin again. And when you drift off, because you will, know that this room, with its cooling embers and its dreaming cat and its unhurried heart, will be waiting, just as you left it,